9:30, a minute till.
It's right about time. I'd like to welcome everyone to class. Glad that y'all are here. Where we talked about last week that, where there was evidence of humans and dinosaurs at the same time, that they find, this evidence in different places, including different national parks in America. And we're on page 23, and we're going to talk this week. It's going to be a little more focused on Bible and dinosaurs. And the question becomes, does the Bible mention dinosaurs? And the answer is you're not going to find the word dinosaur in your most translations of the Bible. And one of the reasons is that word wasn't invented until 1842, and that was, the Bible was in English long before that. So you had Bibles, but that just wasn't a common word back then. Now, do bear in mind that because some people, the reason I mention this having in the notes is some folks think, well, because dinosaurs aren't mentioned in the Bible, then it doesn't mean that, it acknowledges those. But also, bear in mind that there are other animals that we have now that aren't mentioned in the Bible. So to make that argument just because it's not, that word isn't there, isn't a valid argument, because one, the word wasn't invented, two, the Bible doesn't mention kangaroos and giraffes and, there's a bunch of other animals that we still have, and they're just not listed by name in the Bible. And the one thing I mentioned said it didn't even have cats. And I'm like, okay, and I didn't double check that, but when we do look at what's in the Bible, we're going to see three words, and they're translated slightly different ways. We're going to look at the behemoth, another word that's going to be sea monster or sea creature, and then we're going to look at Leviathan. So those are the ones that are prevalent in the Bible. And they're animals that, of course, we don't have any, behemoth farms out here in West Kentucky. You just aren't going to find that. Okay, so John 1:3 tells us all things were made through him, through God. Without him was not anything made that was made. So we know that all animals came from God. And then if you want to turn it, and I've listed Job, I've tried to put the Bibles on the handout, but Job chapter 40 gets into some detail about the first of these, which is the behemoth. And some folks read this and then they go, well, but and they're going to name some modern day animal. Okay, that's how that's going to go. Because they try to, they need to explain this away. They don't want to acknowledge it. So if we look at Job chapter 40, verses 15 through the end of the chapter, it tells us, behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. So we can see different features here. The behemoth is it eats grass, doesn't eat meat. Behold, his strength in his loins and his power in the muscles of his belly. So it's big and it's strong. Verse 17, he makes his tail stiff like a cedar. So its tail is big like a tree. It's not so I'm thinking, well, because it eats grass, that rules out alligators, even though the tail might be like a crocodile or an alligator. The sinews of his thighs are knit together, so it's got strong muscles. Verse 18, his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron, so its legs and arms are very strong like metal. Verse 19, he is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. So it's like to kill it, it's going to take a sword. For the mountains yield food for him where all the wild beasts play. So it likes to live up on the mountains, it's not down in the water or down in the swamp. Under the lotus plants he lies in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. So it does like marshy areas, but up in the mountains, likes the shade. For his shade, the lotus trees cover him, the willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident through Jordan, though Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by his eyes or pierce his nose with a snare? So it talks about this is a good-sized animal. It likes to be in the shade and be sheltered by that. It's not afraid of the river, the high fast currents in the river. So we look at this, and some people might say, well, it's an elephant. And it's like, well, elephants don't have trunks like cedar trees. Yeah, they got strong legs and they're big. But I don't think that this is how, if you were describing an elephant, they would have done a better job describing an elephant than that. And then, so maybe, well, what about a hippopotamus? Hippopotamus doesn't have a big tail. Pig doesn't have a big tail. You know, so unless you want to venture a guess at some other animal that, you know, that it might be, it doesn't sound like it hops around like a kangaroo. So I think this is one of those, we don't really, you know, we don't have a modern day animal that is the behemoth. Any comments on that? Okay, let's go on to page 24, and we're going to consider another word, and it's Hebrew. It'd be like tannin or tannim, T-A-N-N-I-N or T-A-N-N-I-M. And it's going to be translated in different versions: whale, dragon, serpent, sea monster, monster, jackal, and that's just looking at King James and ASV. So this is in here multiple times. So Job chapter 7, verse 12, and this is a sea, you know, this is in the ocean. Okay, so people think about Loch Ness, you know, they got this big animal that people in theory have spotted historically, but never really a good picture or video. So Job 7:12 tells us, am I the sea or a sea monster that you set a guard over me? So that word is there where it's highlighted, sea monster, is that tannin or tannim. Psalm 74:13, you divided the sea by your might, you broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. So again, I don't have this all in context, it's just trying to look at where that is. Psalm 148:7, praise the Lord for the earth, you great sea creatures and all deeps. So here it's, I've captured ESV where you see sea monster, sea creature, serpent, and dragon. That's how ESV does it. Psalm 91:13, you will tread on the lion and the adder, the young lion and the serpent you will trample underfoot. So I thought that was interesting because you're thinking about land animals, and this word is, other places seems to always imply a water animal. And then Isaiah 51:9, awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the dragon? So here it's translated dragon. You're going to see the word dragon used sometimes for the Leviathan as well.
What's the word adder?
The snake, isn't it?
Yeah, adder is a kind of snake,
Okay.
serpent,
The real
poisonous.
poisonous snake.
Right. So I think we don't have them here, but I mean, we just have diamondbacks and copperheads and coral snakes and sort of here, but I think it's more in Asia.
I think I've heard of it, but I wasn't sure.
It's someone that's good at basic math as well.
Oh,
All right,
I wish
so-
I'd have thought of that.
I don't know, someone's trying to break in and hear more jokes, I think.
Now he broke out.
Yeah, ran for it. So then we have the word Leviathan to consider. And I like the Leviathan. This is an interesting animal to consider. So Isaiah chapter 27 verse 1, and that day the Lord with his hand and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeting serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. And Leviathan is well, I may have to take that back. That dragon there, I think, is the previous word, tannin, or tannim. Job 3:8, let those curse, and who curses the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. And as we read more about Leviathan, I don't think that one wants to rouse it up. You don't want to stir this thing up. Psalm 74, verse 13 through 15. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. You split open springs and brooks. You dried up ever-flowing streams. And here you see in verse 13 sea monsters, and I think that's tannin or tannim, and then you get Leviathan in verse 14. Psalm 104 verse 26, there go the ships and Leviathan which you formed to play in it. So you've got out in the ocean these ships moving around in the ocean, and Leviathan plays in the ocean. It's out there in the sea. Job 41:1, can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord? So this is going to come back as of interest, because it asks about, can you basically capture one with a fish hook, a big fish hook? And the answer is no, or it's implied no here. And so it's a key of this is good sized. And of course, some people again think about crocodiles or hippopotamus. There is a saltwater alligator. Most alligators are freshwater, but there's a saltwater alligator. But then we'll get back to that in a little bit. So alligators, crocodiles are big. They're scary. They're people think of them as being related to the dinosaurs. It's interesting. We're going to look at in a few weeks what's related closest. If you take a crocodile, a serpent or a snake, and a chicken, DNA-wise, which two are the closestly related? And it won't necessarily be the two reptiles.
Is it a chicken snake?
It's the chicken and the crocodile. Unless maybe they fed them a lot. Crocodile like
Look,
chicken.
this humor's catchy.
Yeah.
Catching.
So Job 41:15 through 21 tells us, his back is made of rows of shields, shut up closely as with a seal. So its back's shielded hard. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They're joined one another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostril comes forth smoke as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. So this part of it talks about you know, its scales are locked together, like you can't go up there and poke a knife or a spear between them and kill it. But I like the part about when it sneezes, it's like flames shoot out. Now that's pretty cool. That would be terrifying if you know, didn't have a high-power rifle. If all you've got is a knife and you're thinking, I'm gonna go mess with this thing, and it's shooting out sparks and sneezes and flames come out, and you think about this, and we have the images in movies and all of, you know, dragons that breathe flame, and you know, where'd that come from? Well, I suspect it came from here, because this has been written in the, you know, Job was one of the earliest books of the Bible, and people would have read this and thought, that's pretty amazing to have something that can shoot flames out and sparks, and it can boil water and burn, you know, the plants by the edge of the thing, and his breath would start coal on fire. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
The Chinese had that dragon, you know, seeing the restaurants
Yeah.
and everything, and you would think they had some knowledge of some kind of dragon back in their early civilizations, and now they're communists.
Yeah.
Well, you know, all of our supposedly fairy tales dwell on knights and dragons, but who's to say that didn't come from a real knight and a dragon?
I like Shrek's dragon.
Yeah. A friendly dragon, or, you know, you have movies of the kid rides the dragon, the flying dragon, and that kind of stuff. So again, they want people to like dragons. They're not all mean. I heard a story the other day, and it was something about the dragon would fly over the town and set their thatch roofs on fire, and then
He preached that the other day.
yeah, that was
Joey Gleason, yeah.
Joey.
Yeah, Joey did
Gleason
that tonight,
preached that.
yeah.
And I thought, okay, that would have been a good, you know, if we had this lesson last week, would fit right in. So Job, a little farther down in Job 41, it continues on, 26 through 34. Though the sword reaches him, it does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. So they're saying, you know, you can hit it with a sword or a spear or a javelin, and it doesn't do anything, doesn't kill it. 27, he counts iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. So it's trying to make the point that if you had a bronze tipped spear and you threw it and hit it, you know, if you had a piece of rotted wood, you threw it, it'd just splinter and do nothing. So that's kind of the point here. 28, verse 28, the arrow cannot make him flee. For him, sling stones are turned to stubble. So that was another common weapon there. You know, of course, we read about that David killed Goliath with a sling, and it was a highly effective weapon. They would take a rock and they could sling it at, I mean, we're not talking like a little slingshot like we might have that shoots a rock. And yeah, it hurt you, but it, you know, you'd have to be lucky. Their sling was a serious weapon.
Said it could throw like 100 miles an hour, it's like throwing a baseball with a pitcher that hard.
Right,
Yeah, it could
and
really-
throwing a good sized rock 100
Yeah.
miles an hour, if it hits you in the wrong spot, you're a goner. So slings, slings are serious weapons. Verse 29, clubs are counted as stubble. So if you went up there and you had a big club and you're thinking, I'm gonna go up here and whack it in the head, that's probably, it's gonna sneeze on you, and then you're gonna not like how that worked out. He laughs at the rattle of javelin. Okay, so in their fighting methods, you know, we think, well, you know, they, you know, armies would gather up and they would, you know, part of the mental part of warfare was to rattle your weapons, you know, and the other people make them nervous, like you're out here, you know, banging your sword against your shield or rattle your javelin or whatever. And it would, you know, you could use that to scare your opponent. And it could care less. It's sort of like, you're not going to scare it with noise. Verse 30, his underparts are like sharp potsherds. So potsherds are like broken up pieces of ceramic. And so apparently the underbelly of it, like if it crawled over you, it would cut you up. And if you take, I don't know if anyone's ever caught a shark before, but a shark, the skin on a shark is like coarse sandpaper. It's weird. So if you get a shark in the boat and it and it's flopping around, if it rubs against your leg, it will abrade, you'll be bleeding from it. But this sounds like a lot more like coarser, like it would hurt you. He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. So they were used to threshing, you know, separating grain and wheat, you know, the seeds of the grain from the shaft, and it would do like that. It would be abrasive. Verse 31, he makes the deep boil like a pot. So to think about, because going back to, you know, it sneezes and you see flashes and stuff, this is probably like I was thinking, well, it come up to the top, you know, by their ship, by their boat, and it's, you know, breathing out flame, but it may be able to flame underwater and boil the water, because it says it boils the deep. Makes the sea like a pot of ointment. I don't know exactly what that would mean. Behind him he leaves a shining wake. One would think the deep to be white hair. So down in the water, like if you have a boat and you move along the top of the water, especially the bigger it is, it's going to leave a wake behind it, a trail that's usually kind of white looking in the ocean. And this is talking like in the deep, it's leaving white streaks behind it as it goes through the water, which is pretty cool. Verse 33, on earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. So there's nothing like it on top of the ground. And you would think like a lion is pretty much without fear. You would think an elephant might, but I could see particularly, you know, when they have babies and stuff, other animals get after their babies. But they're big, you know, but apparently it's saying this thing just doesn't have any fear. In verse 34, he sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. So we talk about the lion being the king, but this is like the king of the ocean. And I'm not sure, it says he can see things that are high. I don't know if that means it can jump out of the water and fly, or just jump up high enough to see stuff that's up high. But apparently it can see more than just from in the water. So the question becomes, do we have an animal that we could say, well, you know, that's a giant squid from the ocean, or a giant octopus? I've seen pictures of sea octopus and stuff that are like 40 feet long. You know, they're big. But that still wouldn't describe something like an octopus or a squid, because they don't have hard scales and they don't breathe flame. We've not seen anything that does that. It was pointed out that back in Egyptian times, they did hunt crocodiles. So they were able to hunt and kill crocodiles. They would have a baited hook and catch them with a hook, And this mentioned that you couldn't get it with a hook. A lot of scholars think this is a dinosaur. So they don't, a lot of folks think it's a dinosaur or an extinct dinosaur-like animal, because dinosaurs, I think by definition, had to be on the ground. And so, because it's ocean going, it's dinosaur-like. So any comments on the bite?
I'm just glad he's not, they become extinct.
It makes you wonder, though, when you talk about how great and terrible this, but then when you look in Genesis 1, man was made to have dominion over all the animals that were created.
Right.
And it just seems, of course now they're extinct, so it just made me think about that, for man to be able to have dominion over.
Either the flood got them, or man, there's a tribe that went after all those.
They got tired of them, and they decided, we're gonna get rid of these things. And there's people that catch and kill sharks just because they don't like sharks, I mean, I've been deep sea fishing and we've caught them before, and you would hit them with a bat and throw them back. That's how that worked out. Because you just didn't like them.
Well, like some of those great whites, and they're huge. I mean, they're really long sharks even, so.
Right? Yeah. Great whites, orcas, sharks
Orcas, yeah.
are big. I mean, we've seen whales that are,
I mean, white,
I don't know, about as wide as, well, from here to that wall.
That's one thing I'd really like to see. Do they even have them at SeaWorld anymore?
I don't believe they have
Something I would really love to see.
yeah, Shamu, the killer whale was at SeaWorld, and I think they had some movie about how killer whales in captivity, their fin would bend over, and that it was bad because their fin bent over, so then I think that shamed them into not having Shamu, which would swim around the tank and splash water on you as a great thing, especially in summer. So we know there are big animals out there. This didn't say it was as big as a whatever. But the implication was it was good size and it was tough.
You have like the skeleton of like a megalodon, what they call it. Wasn't that a huge shark or something? Way back when, extinct now. Maybe it killed him.
Yeah, maybe that's what this thing ate,
Are whales aggressive by large? I mean, you think of a Doberman Pinscher or a Rottweiler being aggressive. Not all of them are, but the shark, I guess, is aggressive.
Yeah, sharks are aggressive. Well, not all of the sharks are real aggressive. We've seen sand sharks and we've seen Nerf sharks before, and they don't seem, like it's sort of like they'll be there and they won't mess with you. But then, like a barracuda, they will just decide that they're mad at you and come eat you.
Supper.
Yeah. And I've seen them swimming before, and they got these eyes that just kind of stare through you. They're, to me, they're scary. The barracudas are scary. And I mean, the ones we saw were probably not big enough to kill you, but I don't know. I remember going in the water in the Caribbean, and the water's real clear, and you go in and you see a fish, right there in the shallow part that's bigger than you, and you're like, I don't know about this. I'm used to little fish. And they have real pretty ones there too, the parrotfish, and they're real colorful and all that stuff, but there's big fish too. Yeah, I don't think this was a shark. I don't think it was a hippo or a crocodile. Probably a dinosaur. And of course, we know there are other animals that have gone extinct during our lifespan. Okay, so any other comments before we switch gears a little bit? This next section is answering, the book has a section where there are different questions that the evolutionists bring up. And so it's answering basically their arguments. Okay, so they have, you know, their side of the story, so to speak, and this is going to answer to some of those things. So a different sort of direction. The evolutionists now claim that the theory, it used to be called a theory, and we talked about the scientific method a few weeks back, that it's been proven, and we don't speak about it as a theory, but as a fact. That's kind of like, we told you it's a fact, and you need to believe us. Okay, so the theory of evolution, as they would claim as a fact, is based on multiple assumptions. And there is no way for them to prove these assumptions. But that's what they are. They were not things that they have seen or things that they can test or experiment with and repeat the experiment, as we talked about requirement to prove, scientifically prove it as a theory. So the first thing that they have is that there are two major positions that they start out with, and that cannot be explained by anything that has ever been witnessed in the universe. But that's where they are, because no one was present. It's just an assumption, and you got to move from an assumption to a hypothesis, which was like an educated guess, and then if you can prove the hypothesis, you move to a theory. And so this is not past that where it's been proven time and time again. It's not a fact. Okay, so the first assumption is spontaneous generation. And what that means is that you have things that aren't living, and all of a sudden, you know, that carbon and those chemicals, all of a sudden they became alive. And they are now like some amoeba or some living simple organism. But it has to move from a non-living to a living item. Okay, move from chemicals to being an amoeba or a plant or something.
And scientists, like centuries ago, believed that and proved that it didn't happen. Like they would believe that, like when meat bred flies, that was, and then they realized with testing that no, it doesn't, you know.
Right.
So true science proved that doesn't happen.
Yes, that doesn't happen. It has never occurred. They have attempted for centuries in experiments to try to make this happen, because they want to make this happen. So they're going to take what they think are the chemicals or minerals that they think have the greatest chance of making this happen, and they time and time again do those experiments to try to make a living thing. And they've attempted this and they failed. They have never been able to cause a non-living thing to produce something living. So that's the first assumption that's proven wrong, but that's like, well, that's what we got. How else would we have living things? Well, we had a creator that created them, but they can't accept that. Another part of this is they have assumed that only happened one time. And part of that, there's different reasons, and they don't assume that because they can't make it happen. Because they keep trying to make it happen, but they have been unsuccessful. But that's not why they say, well, no, it only happened once. The reason that they say it only happened once is you remember back when we talked about the probability of a DNA and how that chance is extremely, like 1 in 10 to the 6,000, and that didn't happen, right? Well, for that to happen repeatedly, and because one of their other things that they try to talk about is a common ancestor, we'll talk about that next week or so, that things have their commonalities between different plants and animals. So for it to happen repeatedly, they even know that that's ludicrous. There's no way by chance that, oh, well, what basically they don't want to say there's no way by chance it happened once, but they know there is no way it happened more than once. So therefore, their second assumption is this spontaneous generation, life from nothing, something that didn't live, isn't going to happen twice. So you take that and they're like, the problem with this, there's another problem, is all scientists know that one-time events can't be studied by the scientific method. So you can't do something that happened one time, even if it happened now and you saw it, you know, something bizarre happened, and in today's language we'd say, well, that was a miracle because the whatever. Well, but if it only happened one time, and it's never going to happen again, you can't study it with the scientific method that requires you to be able to reproduce it and test it and prove it. So these are non-provable assumptions. They are not supported by any present-day evidence. They're not capable of verifying these in an experiment. It's just I think there are 7 assumptions like this. The book didn't get into the rest. It was kind of like, this is where we start, and the starting point is like, no way. And then a Dr. Denton wrote in Nature's Destiny, whether one accepts or rejects the design hypothesis, there is no avoiding the conclusion that the world looks as if it has been tailored for life. It appears to have been designed. All reality appears to be a vast, coherent, teleological whole with life and mankind at its purpose and goal. So the scientist looks at Earth and goes, you know, it was like this Earth was designed for man to live on it. The plants, the animals, the food for us, it was like, you know, when you look at this, it looks like it was designed, and it was a great design. So any comments on their basic premise, I guess, assumptions? Okay, we'll keep moving. The next one, I mentioned this a couple weeks back in the auditorium about genetic mutations. I mentioned that they're very rare, but I wanted to get into this because it does happen. And so a little bit more detail here. And it's critical to their theory. Okay, so you can't just have natural selection, and I think even natural selection is not really proven, the survival of the fittest. Because you see people who obviously live and are not, you know, they have handicaps, they have physical disabilities, and they live their life, and you're going, well, survival of the fittest would mean they would just, you know, make it. And you see that not with humans and other animals. But they have to have mutations. In other words, to get evolution to happen, you can't just keep having, you know, okay, here's another kid and it has blonde hair and blue eyes, and we like blonde hair and blue eyes. You know, you got to have things change that are bigger than that. So you have mutations, and this does happen. And typically it's a negative thing, but they claim that evolution is the accumulation of all these small changes through these millions of years. But they got to have the mutations, and then they have to have natural selection for evolution in their mind to happen. So in the book, The Way of the Cell, Franklin Harold said, any alteration in the sequence of DNA, once replicated, is inherited henceforth. That is the chemical basis of mutation, and therefore of much of the genetic variation within populations. So if you have a mutation, then the offspring of that mutated one could have that same change in their design. In Quantum Evolution, The New Science of Life, John Joe McFadden wrote, mutations are therefore the elusive source of the variation that Darwin needed to complete his theory of evolution. So the scientists are like, yeah, this is the basic part of Darwin's theory. Ariel Roth in the book Origins wrote, a mutation can refer to a variety of genetic changes such as a change in nucleotide base on the DNA chain, an altered gene position, the loss of a gene, duplication of a gene, or insertion of foreign genetic sequence. So we know that mutations are random. Okay, they have proven, they've studied mutations. It remains true that there's no other than random mutations. In other words, a organism can't need a mutation and get it. So if it's like, boy, I wish, I need an extra hand sometimes. Well, you don't go, well, I wish I got that, and you get it. It's just random. There's no way to control the mutations. So it's not like animals can mutate because they want some other difference. It's just random. Mutations are rare, not common. The chance of a single little mutation in the DNA chain, it varies from 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 10 to the 9th. So 1 in 10 to the 9th is extremely rare, and that's a good thing. Also, one needs to understand not only random, but this makes sense. It can be good, it can be bad, or it can be neutral. So again, not all mutations, they can't sit here and go, all these mutations are good, and they keep making the animal stronger, and it evolves that way. You could have a good one, but you can have bad mutations like hemophilia, which is a mutation that certain people have, and it's like a bleeding disorder. It's a negative thing. And then the questions are, how often do good mutations occur? Good, and the answer is good mutations don't. It's extremely, extremely rare. Very, very rare. 99% of mutations are harmful in some way. And almost all are it's disadvantageous for the person or animal that has that. They affect viability, and they affect viability adversely. Particularly the bigger the mutation is, the more the chance is that you won't make it. So someone can have a mutation and have a little web between their toes, and that won't probably kill you. You can go in and get operated and they'll fix that. But if you have a big mutation, you're probably not going to make it. So the other thing that was real interesting is we know they're rare, but the plants or animals that should have a lot of mutations don't. So you take a bacteria and their lifespan is very short. So, our generations are 20 years apart, and theirs can be seconds. So you would expect, okay, this thing's, it's reproducing, it's splitting, it's doing its thing. You should see mutations. And they're like, well, but the bacteria shows that it has been stabilized for like 1 billion years, according to the scientists. Of course, we don't believe the 1 billion years, but they're like, this hadn't changed in forever. It should change, we keep studying it, but it doesn't change. Another one that they look at is the fruit fly. And I remember when I was a kid in school, they talked about doing experiments with fruit flies because they turn over quickly, and they would try to do experiments on the fruit flies. And again, they haven't said that fruit flies haven't changed since the remotest of times. They've been what they call stasis, no change. And it's interesting that, again, the animals that should mutate quickly and evolve, and they should see it, are static. So we'll stop there and appreciate the comments, and then next week we're going to go, we'll move to, we're about done with the mutations, but we'll go on into the next part.